Great. So we have people joining us online. Thank you for coming to this event on behavioral science and human rights in the digital age. We'll just give a few minutes for everyone to be let in from the lobby. And anyone else who might be coming in the room. And we also will have this event recorded, and we'll share those later as part of the RightsX Summit website for anyone who missed this session. All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at the RightsX Summit for this special solutions roundtable with UN Human Rights and the Council of Europe. The RightsX Summit is dedicated to exploring new methods, tools, and partnerships to strengthen human rights in the digital age. Today, we're going to hear how behavioral science is driving impact for human rights in the digital age. UN Human Rights and the Council of Europe have recently begun exploring how to collaborate on behavioral science, and we look forward today to delving into some of the solutions and lessons that they've learned from their work. My name is Jessica Summers. I'm a data and digital strategist at UN Human Rights, and I'm really thrilled to be your host and moderator for this discussion, as we have a wonderful lineup for you today. And I'd like to introduce our speakers to you. So to my right in the room, we have Pia Oberoi, who's the Senior Human Rights Officer here at UN Human Rights. We have Natalia Voutova, who's the Head of Office to Georgia and Social and Behavior Change Lead in the Council of Europe. We have Danko Runić, sorry if I'm not saying that correctly, Project Manager of the Gender Equality Division, Directorate General of Democracy and Human Dignity at the Council of Europe. And we're also joined by Beka Kopadze, who's a student at the Illia State University, who's been working on a project with Council of Europe. To set the context for behavioral science in human rights work, we do have two short video addresses, one from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Volker Türk, and the other from the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Mr. Michael O'Flaherty. I'll then give you a brief opening presentation on how we're embedding behavioral science into our human rights work at UN Human Rights. And then we'll follow this with our solutions talks from those that you see featured here on the screen.
Colleagues, distinguished participants, the people I have spoken to from across the world in my time as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights have expressed a deep desire for human rights to be respected and protected. Incorporating behavioral science into our human rights work is not merely an academic exercise, it's a pragmatic step to making tangible improvements in people's lives. With its nuanced understanding of human actions and motivations, behavioral science holds tremendous potential to address some of the most entrenched challenges we face by unpacking the cognitive biases that lead to prejudice. We can design interventions and responses that promote empathy, respect, and equality. By improving our awareness of human behavior and decision-making, we can strengthen our outreach to those calling for a seat at the table, including young people and others. And by identifying the behavioral barriers that prevent marginalized groups from accessing their rights, we can develop more effective and equitable policies. So it's really about mindfulness in all that we do. My office is in its early stages of bringing behavioral science to scale, in collaboration with the UN Behavioral Science Group. But we're already using some of the lessons of behavioral science in Asia and the Pacific, for example, where it is informing our efforts to change narratives on migration and to counter discrimination and to reinforce human dignity and rights. Internally, my office is also launching a behavioral science initiative for an environmentally sustainable office to help colleagues learn about our digital carbon footprint and its impact on our environment. Dear colleagues, Building on the excellent work being done by UN practitioners in this emerging area of behavioral science, we look forward to embracing this interdisciplinary approach. Rather than react, we can respond proactively and preventatively. We can tap into what unites us rather than what divides us. Together we can build a future where human rights are for all, everywhere. Thank you.
Hello. As Commissioner for Human Rights, it's my job to support Council of Europe member states to do a better job of upholding human rights. What tools do I have? Well, I don't have a police force. I don't have an army. I don't have some way of insisting on compliance, respect and obedience. What I have is persuasion. In order to be persuasive in my job, I am every day invoking so many different disciplines, and within them at their heart, the discipline of psychology. I'm seeking to find ways to persuade the other person, to change a mind, to bring about that difference. I'm using behavioral sciences, but by and large, I'm doing it in a sort of a unstructured way. And that's why I so very much welcome the investment in a focused look at how the behavioral sciences can work for human rights that lies behind this event. I was involved in one such previous structured effort in the context of communication. How we can do a more effective job of delivering our messages so that they bring about a human rights change. We learned a lot. We learned, for instance, from the cognitive scientists about the different value systems operating in a person's mind and how certain values speak to some people and not others, and then it's the other way around for other people. Some people respond well to invocations of justice. Others, for example, to invocations of security. We can work with that cognitive science insight in order to persuade two different groups in the various settings and contexts. Now, from my one structured experience of engagement with behavioral sciences, I learned three things. There are three takeaways. The first is that people like me, lawyers, cannot do it alone. We have to sit down together with the cognitive scientists, with the psychologists and all the relevant other disciplines to forge the way forward. So it's interdisciplinary. The second thing is that we very quickly enter into ethical minefields. We have to be so careful in the engagement with persuasion that we respect the absolute privacy and right of opinion of the other person. We can't trick the other person, and so ethics comes to bear. And then the third and probably the most important thing of all I learned was that it's one thing to understand the role of the behavioral sciences, it's another to deliver it every day in our work. That's not intuitive. That takes time and effort to change old habits. And again, that's why what you're doing is so important, and I wish you all the very best for these hours together. Thank you.
So I'm going to take you through how we're embedding behavioral science in human rights at the UN Human Rights Office. So we're really focused on bringing behavioral science to scale for human rights. And as I mentioned, I work in strategic planning, which includes for behavioral science at UN Human Rights. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing. But many of you who are here are probably asking, why behavioral science, or what is behavioral science? Well, we're going to have some very good introductions from our speakers today on behavioral science and what that really means for human rights work. But I'll start with the question of why. So why do we bring it into human rights? What value does it have? At UN Human Rights, we believe that ultimately human rights change is about changing behaviors at the individual, institutional, and legislative levels. Behavioral science is the systematic study of human behavior. So for us, it reveals how people perceive things, how they decide, and how they act. Now, for the work that we're doing within UN Human Rights, we want to understand and leverage behavioral science insights to create new pathways for human rights advocacy and engagement. And we do this through our theories of change. So this year we had a workshop with the Council of Europe on bringing behavioral science into human rights theories of change. And it's been a very fruitful collaboration, as you'll see today, and we're continuing to explore how we can possibly do this. But really, the goal is to strengthen our human rights toolbox. What I mentioned earlier, RightsX is about new tools, new partnerships, new methodologies, and behavioral science is certainly part of that toolbox. It enables us to diagnose barriers that prevent people from adopting a certain behavior or perhaps exercising their rights. And some of you may have attended yesterday's session with Cass Sunstein, the professor from Harvard, who's a behavioral science expert. We'll have that reporting on the website coming up as part of RightsX, but fascinating talk about the barriers, or what he calls sludge, to people being able to promote, protect, or exercise their rights. We also think that behavioral science enables us to, well, understand enablers. So how people are achieving their goals or their aims. What are the enablers that are helping them to do that, especially in the rights context? And lastly, it allows us to design and measure the impact of interventions, and that's the methodology part that I mentioned. We have a framework for putting this into our organizational management plan. We're also working on putting it into our pillar results. And so that all becomes part of the toolkit that we mentioned to translate vision into results. As part of this journey, we've developed a roadmap on how we could do this as an organization. And this includes fostering enablers, building capabilities, and nurturing culture, but really taking a use case centric approach to bringing behavioral science into our human rights work. And what I mean by that is it's solutions based, right? What are the problems we're facing today and that our constituents are facing? And then we build outwards from there. And this is, if you've heard of UN 2.0 and the Quintet of Change, this is at the heart of all of those areas of change for the UN. Data, digital transformation, innovation, foresight, and behavioral science. We start with the use case. What are the problems in the world we're trying to solve? And then we build capabilities and culture from there. We have two interlinked tracks for building capabilities. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just to say, we need to be able to apply behavioral perspectives to our office internally. And that's directly linked to how we design behavioral science interventions for impact in human rights externally. So these two are interlinked. We have to be able to walk the talk, right? We have to be able to apply internal practice to external impact. We also look at our organizational culture through a behavioral science lens. And lessons to be learned from behavioral insights that apply to our own office culture. So how can you use behavioral science? We get this question a lot. We're going to deep dive into this with the Council of Europe and my colleague from UN Human Rights now. But all to say, we have a few things that we've highlighted in terms of our own use cases. Some of the projects already underway are in the areas of technical cooperation, advocacy, program design, and organizational effectiveness. So, for example, we recently brought together colleagues from across the globe to train them on using forum and legislative theater for change. This is a more creative, out-of-the-box kind of idea, but we've been piloting several of these initiatives in 2025, including in South Sudan, South Africa, Belize, and just a few days ago in Kenya, where they used legislative theater for a plastic waste picking conference to show how waste pickers are experiencing day-to-day life and then showing that to policymakers so that it can help inform their decision-making. We also work on storytelling for human rights impact. So how can we better structure our communications so that we're really speaking to the behaviors of people in a rights context instead of generally talking, let's say, about advocacy or something else. We also have a program on behavioral science for creating more environmental sustainability within our office. And so once again, using a methodology, what's measurable, what's actually changing in terms of these things? Are we guiding the office towards better sustainability practice? And so there are things that get measured at the front and then at the end, and a comparison of those two allow us to draw some conclusions. And lastly, and this is my colleague Pia, who is to my right, has been using behavioral science with her team to address public migration narratives in the Asia-Pacific region. She's going to take you more in depth on this piece, so I won't come to this now. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome the first of our presenters today, Ms. Pia Oberoi. She's the Senior Human Rights Officer here at UN Human Rights. She's done quite a bit of work in the Asia-Pacific region. And we also will want to hear from the audience as well. So there is a Q&A tab in Teams webinar, and we will select a few questions at the end for Pia. We'll also do the same for those joining from Council of Europe after their sessions. So I encourage you to use the Q&A during Pia's talk. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pia to take us through all of the wonderful work that you've been working on.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Let me just try and share my screen, hoping that the tech gremlins,
Yes, perfect.
the tech gremlins are not.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks a lot for taking us through. I think the big picture about how at UN Human Rights are kind of diving into behavioral science, and we heard from the High Commissioner. I think he had said that we're at the beginning of our journey with the support and the collegiality of the Council of Europe colleagues and others. We're learning as we go along. So what I'll try and do is just take you through two concrete examples of how we've embedded this behavioral science and human rights work. So very recently, I was based in our Bangkok office covering the Asia-Pacific region, working specifically around kind of migration, trafficking, mobility issues. So both of these examples will come from there. But at the outset, I do want to say that from a use case perspective, there's a lot that can be replicated. And I think that that's one of the things that we wanted to bring here. The other thing that I wanted to note was that of the two concrete examples that I'll share, they're both deeply rooted in the digital space. And I think that, in terms of the RightsX Summit, this is, an important thing to say. On the first concrete example is around, as you said, narratives around migration, which are indeed proliferated online. These are both negative as well as positive narrative, but they're exacerbated by this inherent attention-seeking dynamic that social media kind of encourages us to have. And where we've seen misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech spill over from the online world into real-life harm. So that was the first one. And the second one relates more to human trafficking and recruitment pathways. And indeed, the specific example that I'll bring you to is about kind of harms in the online space, both the recruitment as well as the cyber scamming that I'll take you through. So as you said, behavioral science can be used to identify what drives people's decisions and behaviors, and really, to sum it up, why people do what they do. And that for us was a kind of a motivating factor in, getting into these two issues. So the first example is around public narratives on migration. And we noticed that in some countries in the world, and again, this is not something that is limited to one region, we've unfortunately seen unwelcoming narratives in many regions, and that these narratives themselves lead to discrimination and negative policy outcomes for people on the move. So we had these three countries, and what we wanted to try to do was learn how to tell better stories on migration and inclusion, specifically how to reach what we call the undecided middle, so that group of people that may not have made up their minds around migration, but are kind of predisposed to listen, to persuade them towards empathy and community with migrants and minorities. And we're trying to understand not just the target audience's values, but also what messengers appeal to them, what kinds of messages appeal to them. How do we move away from generic and predetermined messaging to targeted communication based on the behavioral insights that we have? So we followed an 8-step methodology. And I should say that right at the end of the screen on the right-hand side, there is a instructive guide that we put together. Society and other stakeholders, governments and academia and others that are interested, and to use the same kind of rigor that we did in terms of their communication on migration and inclusion. And so we conducted 3 sub-regional pilots in the Asia-Pacific region, in Malaysia, Australia, and India. We conducted statistically representative national surveys, and using a mixed methods kind of approach, we started with a contextual review. We did this large-scale social sentiment research to be able to identify the persuadable audience, to identify the common values that they had. And we then crafted messages, tested the messages, and very importantly, we chose the messengers. And again, one of the things that we learned along the way is that the messenger is often as important as the message in this rollout. We designed a campaign, and then finally we measured impact. And I should say that we're also currently developing some capacity building materials that were based on the instructive guide as a way, again, to build capacities. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll see, some of the breakdown in terms of the persuadable audience that we came up with. Not, kind of understanding that there will always be anti-immigration basket of people or a group of people that are going to be anti-immigration or anti-inclusion. And then, of course, we have people that are base, but we had some quite nuanced understanding of our persuadable audience. And it's all in the guide there, so please do have a look at it. But I just wanted to stop a little bit and look at impact, because we did try to evaluate our interventions and to understand in different ways how we could do that. So again, understanding of the toolkit of methodologies, we used focus groups, we used, again, broad surveys that were rolled out through social media. For instance, in Australia, we ran a survey of 600 people where we learned that people actually became more confident to discuss migration topics, that they said their support for migrants and migration had increased after seeing the video. In Malaysia, particularly, we deepened this effort through strong partnerships with local actors. And the Dari Dapur campaign, in fact, continues to run. It's just going to enter a second phase, which will deepen the focus on measurement as well as of building the capacity of infected communities, so refugees, migrant workers themselves, to be involved in narrative change. So if the gremlins work, we can try and show a little bit of...
I love what we've created here, this little safe space of family, and the food, which is always the center of what brings us together. I just finished eating and my belt's a bit tight. I ate so much, probably more than my fair share.
Malaysia is known for, I would say, as one of the best cuisines in the world. It really represents the best of Malay, Chinese, and Indian food coming together. And that really tells you the story about migration and food.
A lot of my friends, they didn't have an off day. I'm the lucky one, so I can be here.
One thing that I want to share is alarming is that less than 30% of refugees college-going students are not going to college.
I share my story because I want to tell them what's happening in Myanmar. Our children and our students, their future is like no future, no school.
I don't know if you know this, but I actually experienced Jinjang police lockup, and Sungai Buloh prison. So it is not a place that you have to undergo. And I think that's why it hits home.
The whole time I just wanted to reach out and say I wanted to say that, you know, Malaysians, and I wanted to say that I want to speak for all Malaysians, but I cannot. But Malaysians, we accept you.
I believe in one thing. A person would only hate you if they don't understand you, and if they don't know who you are, and if they don't know your background, or if you don't tell your story.
You know, in our refugee is not like a little bit feel sad, but now today is like a family.
I feel more humanity in this space than I do anywhere else. Dari Dapur always, I have to not cry I record with you guys, but there's something about it that really touches the bottom of my heart here.
The community that cuts across Malaysians, migrant workers from different countries, refugees. There is a real sense of people coming together around food, but also around their shared experience, and that's really beautiful to see.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. All of us have a migration story. We just have to look further in our lineage, that's all. For me, it was my grandfather. For you, it could be your great-grandfather, could be your father, could be you. And can you imagine if when your grandfather, for instance, migrated here to Malaysia and they went through the same thing that these people are going through right now, how would you feel?
Muslims, we love the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Well, he made the hijrah. He migrated from Mecca to Medina. We're talking about more than 300 kilometers here, right, to escape persecution. So it's very much the migration story. It's our story.
Okay, thank you very much. So that was just a little snapshot of the Dari Dapur campaign. And as you will have seen, the messengers that we chose, so many of the people that were speaking were the messengers that were drawn from the research. There's prominent comedians, journalists, politicians, and the life that it has now continues because they've created, with the local partners, we've created, I think, a momentum. So that's really gratifying to see. And all credit to our local partners that have really, done some wonderful work. I'll move on to the second concrete example because I want to spend just a little bit more time on it. And this is in the area of counter-trafficking, where we found the behavioral lens to be particularly important because in the area of counter-trafficking, as those of you that might work in that area knows, there are a number of assumptions that kind of are an umbrella to the policy making. So we have assumptions around individual level vulnerabilities, that the idea that gender and age can explain drivers into trafficking, that it's usually women that are, or young women that are trafficked, but also the assumption of ignorance, such that the provision of information, such as public awareness raising campaigns, enables migrants to not be vulnerable to trafficking, so that kind of providing that information is a silver bullet, if you will, to trafficking prevention. And we undertook this, and I should say that even with the last intervention, as with this one, we really benefited from a number of deep partnerships. In this case, we have partnered with Behavioural Australia at Monash University, and really benefited from their expertise on behavioural science. I should also note, before I speak, that this research that I'm going to present in a little way to you is included in a forthcoming report that we'll be releasing early next year on trafficking into forced criminality for cyber scamming operations in Southeast Asia. So I'm not going to focus too much on the human rights problem. You can wait for the report to read about that. But I do want to talk about the methodology that we followed. And just to say about the problem, though, just in a very few words, there are large numbers of people from around the world that have been fraudulently and coercively recruited to work as scammers in Southeast Asian countries, in what are often industrial scale compounds where they're subjected to torture and other human rights violations. Our intervention aimed to use behavioral science as a diagnostic tool. So different from the first example that I've told you about, we really wanted to use this to very, in a granular way, answer the question, why do people do what they do? Why are people being fraudulently recruited into these trafficking pathways? And We followed a mixed methods research. I'm sorry, just to go back to that. So, you will see the different kind of elements of the research, including monitoring, working with experts, media monitoring, as well as working with survivors. And we followed this research methodology with a kind of an innovation at its heart. And I want to say innovation, kind of like, lightly understood, because of course, as you pointed out, Jessica, we have the Human Rights Toolkit, we have a number of tools. We took a core instrument in that toolbox, which is monitoring and documentation of human rights harms, which is, a very fundamental element of how we engage on human rights issues through engagement with victims and survivors. But what we introduced into that was a quantitative element, a quantitative behavioral inquiry into the more usual open-ended qualitative interview process. So and I'll take you through that in a second, but we, of course, also relied on information from verified victim testimony collected by our partners, as well as credible open source media material. But our own inquiry focused on in-depth remote engagement with 19 survivors of trafficking. And while it's difficult to claim statistically representative data because of the clandestine nature of the phenomenon, even a snapshot of the demographic data of our 19 survivors enabled us to question some common assumptions. For instance, the assumption that all the victims of this particular form of trafficking are highly educated professionals, or that most victims of trafficking are women. In fact, in this case, more men than women are being trafficked. The quantitative survey tool that we designed for this inquiry focused on the recruitment pathway followed by survivors. So we sought to zoom in on the central issue of trust, the role of trust in the process of recruitment. And this was to interrogate the assumption that most people are recruited through their own cold approaches to online job sites, so that they, like many of us might do, are kind of being fraudulently recruited by going on to a Facebook job site or others. And we did that also, again, in the face of some common assumptions. The idea that public awareness campaigns should try to convince people that online scams are not jobs, for instance, or that there's, that they just need education to be able to resist this recruitment. But really what we were trying to understand was the nuances related to these job searches. And indeed, trust emerges a key issue in the recruitment pathways followed by survivors. Some 3/4 of our respondents knew and trusted their recruiter. So this is not, kind of really questioning some common assumptions around how recruitment happens. We used the survey tools, and we, introduced various Likert scales to understand the victim's experience of recruitment in terms of their motivation to seek out jobs, what were the drivers, whether they knew the country that they would be working in, what their visa situation would be like, etc. So, along with trauma-informed, qualitative, open-ended questions, being able to bring in an element of quantitative analysis enabled us to move forward with this understanding. Now, through this inquiry, we realized that what we were hearing from the victims of trafficking that we were speaking to mirrored, in many sense, the experiences of recruitment and the drivers of migration that we would often hear from people that were seeking labor migration outcomes. And that, we heard about the fact that there's multiple layers of brokers, private recruitment agencies, other intermediaries. We heard about deception. This is something that we hear from migrant workers all the time, the lack of regulation. And the deficits that they faced were the same or similar to deficits that we see in labor migration recruitment. So that while the pathways into the scam operations lead not into labor migration, this is very clear, but into trafficking and exploitation, it was clear through our inquiry that aspiring migrants may be unlikely or even unable to distinguish easily between the two, so that, in fact, people thought that they were entering normal labor migration routes because it looked a lot very similar to what they were expecting to experience, and indeed, in some cases, had experienced in previous labor migration pathways. The majority of victims we spoke to had not heard of scam operations, despite, awareness raising in the region and different awareness raising interventions. But at the same time, there were survivors who had heard about existence of these operations, but they were often only aware of them in very nebulous terms, and many believed they would not personally be at risk. So, for instance, one victim admitted that he had heard rumors about compounds, but dismissed the risk because he had heard that they only exist outside countries, and the job that he was offered was very firmly inside his country of origin. Another recalled that during her passport application, she was required to sign documents warning of trafficking risk, but she signed them and didn't interpret the risk as relevant to her. And even in cases where red flags may have appeared in the recruitment process, such as being offered inflated salaries or not being required to provide education certificates, they were largely dismissed or ignored by victims. And why was this the case? Again, we went back to the behavioral science toolbox to try to understand this. And research showing that human behavior is not simply the result of deliberative reasoning. People tend to rely on mental shortcuts and intuitive and often unconscious processes to simplify and accelerate decision making, which can sometimes lead to quote unquote errors in judgment or biases. And the kinds of cognitive biases that you see on their screen very much affected the way that the survivors thought, and indeed prevented them from taking what would customarily be considered rational decisions. So why didn't you just not accept this recruitment offer, for instance? That was these biases were activated in situations, and again, we heard from the survivors that they had strong pressures around the need to put in place, livelihood options. They had familial obligations. So all of that prevented them from taking what would be quote unquote rational decisions around prevention of this fraudulent recruitment. For us, this signaled the importance of bringing in a systems approach, because we're not just looking then at the individual as the site for the inquiry, but we're really looking at broader systemic, entrenched drivers of behavior, to locate the behavior more clearly within the context in which it occurs. So trafficking is a complex and deeply entrenched issue. It often involves multiple and diverse stakeholders. It's rooted in pervasive structural protection gaps and enabled by constraining social norms and stereotypes. By drawing up the systems map of the actors, the components, the barriers, as well as the enablers, we were able to get a more grounded idea of how the choices that individuals make and are making are themselves constrained and embedded in larger structures. So we used the COMBI model, which is, for those of you that are behavioral scientists, and I should start with my usual disclaimer that I'm not a behavioral scientist, I'm a very enthusiastic amateur. But learning through the capability, opportunity, and motivation as triggers for behavior, we learned that it is possible to outline how each component of the framework is activated along the recruitment pathway that leads victims into these operations. So capability being enhanced through seemingly professionalized processes and advertising of familiar job roles, opportunities being leveraged to the exploitation of socioeconomic pressures and employment and trusted networks, and motivation being shaped through manufactured social proof in the targeting of at-risk populations, of people that are desperately in need of livelihood options, people from minority communities. We found that structural socioeconomic drivers, which were reinforced by the kind of cognitive biases that I spoke of before, consistently overrided awareness barriers. So that knowledge provision campaigns alone, in our opinion, are unlikely to produce effective changes in behavior. There may indeed be a place for increasing capability through strategic awareness-raising interventions, but we realize that more contextualized research is needed about precisely where these messages should be delivered, who delivers them, and what they should say. At the same time, while scam operations currently exploit physical and social opportunities, these same contextual channels represent potential leverage points for disruption. These leverage points, again, leaning back on the systems analysis that we did, could include increasing the availability and accessibility of safe labor migration pathways, enhancing transparency and accountability in cross-border recruitment through greater regulation and oversight, and indeed going back to the digital space to verify job posting and flag job postings and flag suspicious recruitment patterns on social media platforms. So by reshaping the opportunity landscape through these different mechanisms, through policy mechanisms, technology and institutional mechanisms, it may be possible to counter the contextual advantages that we see and to prevent them into scam operations. So I'll stop just by reiterating the point just that it's made, which is that understanding and addressing human behavior plays an integral role in making human rights change happen. I think what we learned as well through this process was that behaviors don't happen in isolation, and change is not only about the individual, which is of course something that we know as human rights practitioners. A behavioral systems approach, and this is the one that we settled on in the trafficking intervention, looks at behavior not just as an individual choice, but as something that is shaped by a system of actors, components, and rules. And indeed, the light bulb moment for us was that approach has so much in common with human rights-based inquiry, where what we want to do is to understand systemic challenges and opportunities for the fulfillment of international human rights standards. So we kind of came full circle to see that using this, one tool in the broader toolbox actually illuminates the kind of human rights and pathway that we're striving to look for change. I'll stop. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think I'll switch to just a room view here for the moment. So we do have some time for some questions for Pia before we go to the next segment with the Council of Europe. And I mean, I'm astonished every time I hear from you, I talk to you, just the amazing projects you have lined up and the different ways you're looking to use behavioral science and human rights work, from changing migrant perspectives, which we had looked at earlier in Southeast Asia, but then to now this. I mean, I've looked at some of the findings that you shared, and it's really shocking just to understand the whole system, as you said, that's behind fraudulent recruitment into cyber scam centers and the trafficking of people throughout that. And so the demographics surprised me, the way they're recruited surprised me. I mean, it's a formalized process that, as you said, feels like a very legitimate recruitment process. You go through job interviews, you have assessments, you get some sort of travel and transport, and so it feels like, oh, I'm going into a real labor migrant job, but it's not actually a real one. So as I mentioned, we have time for some Q&A. For those who are online, there is a Q&A button at the top, and it will open that panel if you'd like to put any questions in there. But I'd also like to open the floor here in the room. Please take advantage of this extraordinary colleague we have to ask questions. So we'll start with here.
Thank you very much. So I am a social scientist. So my PhD was looking at experiences of people, be it in that context. But I now work for an international NGO. We're in 60 countries, and we've set up an AI commission to look at AI. So I ran a workshop with women from 15 countries in the Philippines in November 2023. So that's just before ChatGPT hit the fan, if you like. And I feel there was a bit of a missed opportunity on my part, because I didn't have the confidence at that point to say, oh, all this PhD stuff I've done, I can actually use it for real human rights work. So we looked at some of the barriers. And we work predominantly with older women. So because a lot of it's voluntary based, we don't have so many of the young people are busy building lives. So we were looking more at the impact on the older generation. And we saw some of the usual barriers, access, because we're in such a diverse range of countries, ranging from Kenya, Madagascar, places to the West, France, Germany. So it was really, I've been thinking since then, how can we go back and explore that further, and what? So I was very interested in taking notes of your methodology. So that's what because I've run focus groups online, that was part of my PhD. So I'm thinking of sort of how can I adapt that to what I think could be very helpful, but also not just for us as an organization internally, which is how I was thinking of it, could be useful to a wider audience, given we have millions of members in 64 countries. So thank you very much for that. It's given me a bit more thought for what I've already been thinking about over the last few months. But I haven't been put it into action. Haven't discussed it with our board yet because most of them are not social scientists, but they're usually very supportive of when I did the workshop in the Philippines. So hopefully get them on board. But certainly I would be interested to look at some of your resources. And I know somebody who's done a PhD in trafficking in India, his whole thesis, and also a survivor of trafficking, a young woman who was taken into trafficking, into eventually prostitution, drugs, all sorts. But it was through a friend. So again, it's sort of saying what you're saying. So I know this with that. Thank you. Anyone that's given me a bit more confidence to sort of pursue my own intuition was telling me that I should need to use what I've learned for good use.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I believe you had a question.
Yes. First of all, Ms. Oberoi, thank you for the concrete examples and your valuable insights. So my question will be about the counter-trafficking example that you provided and the study that you conducted. So we talked about the assumptions that we have in counter-trafficking approaches, the individual level vulnerabilities and ignorance. And as we all know, when it comes to trafficking, there are more young girl and women victims compared to like male victims. And yes, like you said, the recruitment process was very interesting, the results too. But as far as I know, most of the research that's currently conducted in terms of trafficking is more narrowed down into the trafficking process that leads to prostitution and drugs. So my question is that most of the survivors after the survey told that they either thought that it looked legitimate or that they weren't in a way informed enough. So what I want to ask is how can we ensure that on an individual level people can be better informed, and like how can we incorporate this in concrete methods? How can we ensure better information for especially young girls? Are there any telltale signs to look for when it comes to who to trust, or after which point starting to look for the signs that it might actually lead into trafficking? So thank you.
Would you like to pause for responses to the first two?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And thanks for the reflection, because I think it's really important to kind of trust your instincts in a way. You know, there's a lot of the inquiry we did, and I should give a shout out to my amazing colleagues that are in Bangkok. I know some of them are online because this was a real team effort, and Jessie. And I did want to just kind of highlight that, you know, one of the ways to make the argument as well is doing precisely what you're doing with the focus groups, talking to survivors, is that you're centering lived experience. And that is the fundamental nub of human rights work. It's speaking to rights holders, it's understanding, you know, from people's lived realities, how you then build out an intervention. So, you know, do have a look at the guide that we put together that does give some pointers as well for, you know, things like running focus groups, but also doing, you know, kind of survey work and things like that. Because what we tried to say, we didn't have unending resources either, you know, as most CSOs do not. Exactly. So there are some tips that might help you. And thanks also for your question around, you know, how we disrupt trafficking pathways. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, you know, trafficking it's a very kind of heterogeneous issue as well. So in some countries and sectors, certainly women and girls would be overrepresented victims. In others, such as in this one, young men are highly overrepresented, and even though women are becoming more and more drawn into this form of trafficking. I think what we've learned, and you know, we've just reached the end of the diagnostic element of it, and I think it's fair to say that what we will be doing going over the next few months, as well as deepening our systems analysis to understand exactly where the various components fit in. Because I don't want to say it's easy, but often the assumption, like I said, the assumption of ignorance leads us to information provision. So we say, well, they couldn't have known, they couldn't have consented to this, so they mustn't have been aware. And what we do then is try to put in place. And I think one of the former special rapporteurs on trafficking has a slightly damning kind of analysis of these public information provision campaigns that tend to be rolled out and without very, much kind of analysis of where, the results. And the one thing I think that we did kind of learn through this process was that context is key. So we talked to 19 survivors. We accessed the testimony of about 45 more people, and in each particular context, whether it's a country context, whether it's a sub-local context, the dynamics were different. Very often it was people that people knew, and they, for instance, in a place like Bangladesh, they were accessing the same dalals, they were accessing the same brokers. Sometimes these brokers had been approached by the transnational syndicates and were then sending people into trafficking. Sometimes the brokers were sending them to a legitimate labor migration opportunity in Malaysia. So in that context, it's not so much a higher level information awareness, it's more about a community-based intervention to work with communities to understand where the fracture points might be, where the risk might lie. And, often, obviously, in these communities, everybody knew this broker is, and we were told by the survivors, well, that broker is still active on this Facebook job group, etc. So again, without wanting to say there's no silver bullet, I'm afraid to say, unfortunately, in this kind of entrenched trafficking situation, because it's not just the shadowy criminal coming to, it really is kind of layers of vulnerability and risk, at the top of which are criminal syndicates that are learning how to use behavioral science, frankly, also to exploit and entrap victims. So, but underneath that, there's a lot of people that are trying to do, make sense of opaque labor migration recruitment pathways that don't work particularly well, trying to find livelihood options for themselves inside the country, outside the country. But as with, again, coming back to basics, as with a lot of human rights work, being context driven is super, super important. So everything that we've recommended in terms of intervention really does come back to community-based interventions and kind of building on the knowledge and the risk management and mitigation structures that communities have.
So behavioral science is a very good methodological framework, but then building the context on top of that in terms of how it's applied and the systems that are mapped out against that.
Yes, exactly. Bringing those behavioral insights into the broader systems approach, I think, is, from a human rights perspective, something that is deeply, deeply attractive, because it means that we're looking at the big as well as the little.
So we'll have some more time for question and answer at the end. I do want to turn it over to our colleagues from the Council of Europe. So thank you, Pia, for taking us through that. As I mentioned at the beginning, UN Human Rights has been in collaboration with the Council of Europe on these kind of initiatives of understanding behavioral science insights. So it's my pleasure to introduce Natalia Voutova, who is the Social and Behavior Change Lead and Head of Council of Europe Office to Georgia.
Thank you so very much, Jessica. Yes, thank you so much. Indeed, when we started collaboration, like last year, if I remember, for me, it was such a rewarding meeting I had with you and with my colleagues, and especially when I found out that UN human rights have this roadmap on human rights and behavioral science. It was really like the aha moment for me to find like-minded colleagues, because by now we all know, we all understand that in the 21st century, for human rights to be protected and promoted, we really need to go beyond the international norms, legislation, guidelines, recommendations, decisions of national and international courts, which are very important. They're really like the ground. They serve the ground for the protection and promotion of human rights. But we understand more and more that human rights protection is about introducing and supporting positive change, right? It is change in practices, change in harmful social norms, and change of behavior, of course. And that's why the Council of Europe, for us, it is even more important to go beyond our traditional tools, which are legal norms, provision, awareness raising, capacity building, and we are more and more embedding behavioral science in what we are doing. So, for instance, we are taking behavioral science on board when we promote acquisition of citizenship in member states by refugees, or promotion of the rights of medical patients in order to have their confidentiality protected. We are introducing behavioral science when it comes to participation, promotion of participation of citizens in decision making, be it local level or at national level. And that brings me to the 16 days of campaign against gender-based violence, and we are very happy to be able to share with you what we have started doing here in Republic of Georgia when it comes to technologically facilitated gender-based violence, and how to fight this absolute evil. And we know now every day, every month, every year, more and more about how harmful it is. And my colleague Danko Runić will be able to share more of the work that we are doing in this area, because as per Oscar Wilde, everything in this world is about sex, with the exception of sex, because sex is about power. So this is what we're looking at. Technologically facilitated gender-based violence is about entrenched negative social norms. It is about practices that have always existed in countries, in all actually countries that we have around the world. It is, and most importantly, is about power structures. It's about power models. It's about power threats. That's why it is important for us to have the tech industry, tech companies on board, because without them, we cannot address the problem. And even more importantly, is to have young people on board. That's why I'm also very happy to have today with us Beka Kopadze, who has participated and is still working with us on the first that we had about 3 weeks ago here in Republic of Georgia, how to have youth on board when it comes to fighting against this evil. So I will stop here, and I would like to pass the floor to my colleague Danko Runić, who is currently based in Strasbourg at our headquarters. Danko, please.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Dear colleagues, dear friends, greetings from the Council of Europe headquarters here in Strasbourg. I work on cooperation projects and capacity building on gender equality, as Natalia has said, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you today. Dear friends, development of technologies for better or worse is not going to slow down. And if we want the digital space to be built on values which are also enshrined by the Council of Europe, the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, we must address technology-facilitated violence against women with every tool available. And we have done a lot here at the Council of Europe. Natalia has mentioned that we do quite a lot of work on the policy side. And so back in 2021, our monitoring body, which is in charge of overseeing the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, Grevio, adopted their general recommendation #1, which is precisely on the digital dimension of violence against women. And what I can share with you exclusively is about the work which is coming to an end rather soon. So we at the Council of Europe have developed a draft recommendation on accountability for technology-facilitated violence against women and girls. And these recommendations will be considered for adoption by our Committee of Ministers early next year. But what I can tell you now already is that the draft recommendation provides guidance to help all relevant actors play their role in preventing and addressing this phenomenon. The recommendation also includes guidance for technology companies, including online platforms, to ensure that their products and services are not misused to perpetuate technology-facilitated violence. We really hope to inspire the tech community to adopt safety by design standards, to conduct human rights risk assessments, implement effective content moderation, and collaborate across the sector, particularly with members of civil society, to tackle this type of violence. Dear colleagues, it is the latest what we have done on the policy side, but coming back to behavioral science, to enhance our impact through our projects, we also use behavioral science. And this is so also in the case of addressing technology-facilitated violence against women. As said already, laws and policies alone are not sufficient, and we need to have a thorough understanding of human nature as well. So questions which behavioral science can help us respond to are basically, what are the social norms underpinning and contributing to technology-facilitated violence against women? What are the motivations, the triggers, as well as rewards for people who do engage in digital violence? There is an understanding and underpinned also by research that technology-facilitated violence is of course a tremendously damaging phenomenon. And some research, according to the UNFPA, shows that 16 to 50% of women and girls worldwide are targeted by digital violence. To address this vile phenomenon, we did engage and we continue to engage with the IT sector, as they are among primary target groups who need to address this. Throughout our member states, Georgia included, we work with young IT specialists using behavioral insights and neuroscience to reinforce their role in fighting discrimination in general, and particularly technology-facilitated violence against women through addressing the products that they design. Understanding how gender and other discriminatory biases are factored into AI is also of our interest, and what methods could be utilized to prevent that these biases are amplified. And that is basically the key to addressing the problem. Let me also mention, please, that the Council of Europe is also looking into ways to increase the number of women working in the IT sector, and we do use applied behavioral science in addressing this matter. And to provide you with a concrete example, just last month, as Natalia has said, as a part of a two-day event, we gathered around 25 IT specialists in Georgia as part of our cooperation project. And we did envisage together with them on how they see their role in ensuring that IT products they generate are gender sensitive and do not contribute to technology-facilitated violence. The discussions were facilitated by a behavioral scientist, and the solutions, which included behavioral science, were demonstrated during the hackathon, which was also part of the event. I'm really delighted to have Beka Kopadze with us today, who was one of the 25 participants at our event, and he will be speaking to you shortly. We will continue to expand this experience also beyond Georgia. And let me also mention that besides the work with tech professionals, we also use behavioral science in other areas. I think on another occasion I will use the opportunity and tell you more perhaps on how we use behavioral science in tackling judicial gender bias. This is of great interest to us in our work with members of the judiciary from across several Council of Europe member states. Allow me please to thank the UN colleagues for the invitation to participate in this RightsX Summit and to wish also the happy Human Rights Day to everyone. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but now over to you, Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danko. Well, as I said, the work with youth is essential. It is essential for the UN, it is essential for the Council of Europe, and it's my pleasure to have Beka Kopadze, who is going to share with us his experience as one of the participants in the training we had a couple of weeks ago in Georgia. Beka, please.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Beka Kopadze, a computer science student at Illia State University in Tbilisi, Republic of Georgia. I recently attended 2-day training for people in tech, and I'd love to share some of the things that I've learned. The training was about behavioral science and how it contributes to the fight against technology-facilitated violence against women and girls. For example, this training made me realize how our decisions as developers can impact the people who use our products. We explored common thinking errors, cognitive biases, and how this can shape user behavior. What really surprised me was realizing that these biases are not just abstract ideas from psychology books. They actually show up in the interfaces we design, in recommendation systems, and even in the questions we ask during building a project. These sessions made me see that behavioral change is not just a theory. It's something we can apply to create better, more responsible technology. For example, I learned how small design choices like setting a default option or the way we present information can guide users toward safer or healthier decisions. It made me realize that as developers, we are not just writing code, we are also influencing people's actions, and that unintentionally we can contribute to gender-based violence or discrimination. This is a huge responsibility, but also an opportunity to design product that actively helps prevent technologically facilitated gender-based violence and support gender and other forms of diversities. Because of this, I want to be more thoughtful about the impact of my work and aim to design products that genuinely helps users rather than unintentionally steering the wrong directions. Also, I want to mention that group works was very important. Collaborating, sharing ideas, and learning from others made the experience even more valuable. It reminded me that behavioral change is not just about users, it's also about how we work together as a team, communicate, and support each other to create more ethical and user-centered technology. And at a time when my country is facing many challenges, this training gave me something hopeful. It showed me that when young people come together, share knowledge, and work with purpose, we really can make a positive difference. And that was beautiful. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Beka. Thank you so much. As I usually say to the participants in my trainings, behavioral science is everywhere. We do not realize it, and that's as, for instance, Danko mentioned it. It's important for us to work with judges. It's important to work with IT specialists. It is important to work with social workers when protecting children against sexual harm. So behavioral science, neuroscience, I really believe that this is something of the present, of course, but of the future. We recently also cooperated with an absolutely amazing festival that is happening in Tbilisi every year, Data Fest, which gathers hundreds, if IT specialists in artificial intelligence, not only from Georgia, from the region and from Europe and beyond, where, for instance, for us as a value-based organization, as an organization that promotes human rights, it was important to emphasize through an open lecture with an amazing specialist expert how, for instance, artificial intelligence fuels inequalities, fuels discrimination actually, and that it's still not too late, but probably very soon it will be late to address these problems, and that they have to be inclusive. As again Danko mentioned, we need to have more women in the tech industry, because different perspectives are very important. People working in marketing, they have understood that unless you present products from the point of view of different types of customers, you're not going to succeed. Probably your competitor will do a much better job than you. So these are some of the aspects that I'm sure that we will have the opportunity for us to cooperate with the UN human rights, not only online, but even more and more in person. As mentioned by Jessica, the workshop that we had back in April on theory of change, on behaviorally informed theory of change of our actions that we conduct in different member states are of utmost importance. And the last aspect that the last point I wanted to mention, I mean, as I said, guidelines, legal norms, standards are very, very important. They constitute the basis for any further actions that we have. And I'm very, very pleased that our Council of Europe Gender Equality Commission has taken on board behavioral science when designing the guidance for the development of positive narratives to deflect under anti-gender rhetoric, which will be available very, very soon. So that's pretty much on our side as an introduction, and of course we are more than happy, very happy to take any questions. Jessica, over to you.
From the Council of Europe and to Beka for a very rich discussion and outlining not only about the recommendations of the Council and the legal norms and other things, the guidelines that are being established, but also how that plays out on the ground with someone like Beka, who's been in an actual training. And I think what's really novel to this approach as well is Beka's studying IT, but you're bringing a behavioral science approach to his work as well. So it's not just about a training on gender-based violence, it's also about the approach and the methodology itself, which I think is really useful and as we've been talking about, actually scalable or replicable in other contexts. So we have a little bit of time. For those online, if you'd like to post any questions in the Q&A, there's a button at the very top of Teams there that opens the panel to ask those questions. We have participants in the room. It would be great if you'd like to share any comments or any questions that you have for Council of Europe or for Beka. Or Pia, if you have any questions.
I can have a question.
Sure, absolutely. It's a dialogue. So.
Right. No, but I mean, really, thanks so much, Natalia, for bringing the colleagues and Beka for your really great sharing. I wonder whether, I don't know whether it's possible to reflect a little bit on, I mean, I know that we talk about the opportunities that behavioral science brings. I don't know whether we can reflect as well on, you know, what you see as some of the roadblocks or the obstacles and how we can overcome them. You guys have been much further along, I think, the journey in a sense than us. I'd be really interested to hear your reflections now that you've been doing this work for some time. And also from Beka to hear, you know, kind of what was the greatest lesson that you learned from being involved in this experiment?
Well, I will just start very shortly. Well, from my perspective, I think that like the initial biggest challenge is probably the not so big awareness of people that behavioral science is everywhere. But from my experience, once you start the conversation, that it is not about bringing an extra layer of, I don't know, of administration, bureaucracy. It is not about making the work of the colleagues more complicated and cumbersome, but on the contrary, to build on what exists already and to bring this new perspective, because as I said, without neuroscience, without cognitive science, we will not be able to advance against these huge challenges, against these huge evils, as I call them. Because traditional ways, traditional approaches are probably very much like anchored in the future. But I will give the floor to Beka, who is much better placed than me to talk about the future, I think.
So about the future, I will try to not make comment about it because from my experience, I'm still learning and I don't know how we should make everything better, and I'm still developing and so on. So I will try to not make comment about it. But for the other question, what was the greatest thing that I took from these meetings was that I should not look to the program that I'm developing only from my side, but there are a lot of people who will use this program, and I should see how this can affect them, and I should like see how should I change it to make it better and more responsible to not harm anyone. And that was the greatest thing I took from these lectures and these trainings. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Beka. So, Jessica, you see we're good at brainwashing people in 48 hours. So we're quite in that case for the good cause. But thank you, Beka. I think we have a question. Someone raised his hand, or Jessica.
Yes, I see Chip online. If we have any other questions in the room, I can take those, and then
I might have a question.
Yes.
So my question will be a general one, but considering you're, of course, in a very advanced position now, when it comes to how to incorporate countermeasures, when it comes to fighting with digital violence against women and the digital aspect of it, I want to ask, how do you think the use of AI and the new innovative technologies that are in place can be used, for example, when it comes to specific words or sentences or patterns used in social media and other digital platforms?
Great question.
Beka, do you have any insights on that as an IT person?
So one of the greatest ways to make AI more better in that terms is that to train it in better information and statistics, because that's how AI creates information and give us answers from the data it learned. So we need to figure out and try to make that data that it's been trained on better, more gender-friendly, user-friendly, and so on. That is actually the greatest option.
Yes, and if I can just add to that in a more kind of sarcastic way, probably. You know that one of the two fathers, so to say, of behavioral science, Amos Tversky, has this very famous sentence from the late 80s, from the 90s, where artificial intelligence was at a very nascent stage. He said that I have colleagues who deal with artificial intelligence. I deal with natural stupidity. So now the challenge is to how not to have natural stupidity actually embedded for good in artificial intelligence, because as our expert we had here in Tbilisi a couple of weeks ago said, we call it artificial intelligence, but we rather call it data on steroids, because it's kind of human intelligence is human intelligence, but to call something like sort of group of data which has been like propelled to this level is probably not very nice to the human kind, of course, provided that natural stupidity is not embedded in artificial intelligence. So I don't know whether I answer your question, but probably these are some kind of elements that Beka and I could provide you with.
Well, certainly some very good quotes to think about too. All right, we do have time for one more question. I see, Chip, you're online. You've been very patient with your hand up. I'll just go ahead and unmute you. Chip, if you'd like to go ahead and, or you can unmute yourself, it looks like, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, hi, Chip Pitts here. And in my teaching and work with organizations, global nonprofits that work on anti-trafficking and the full panoply of human rights issues, and as a UN expert, I'm a big fan of these approaches. It's great to see them institutionalized at organizations, you know, like the High Commissioner's Office or the Council of Europe, etc. But I found that the biggest issues are ones of scale, and also connecting to the sort of elephants in the room, like corruption, you know, the drivers of money and power that are part of the system that, you know, are responsible for a lot of atrocities ranging from war to trafficking. And my question is whether, you know, that problem is on the agenda, and what you see as sort of approaches to scale. Getting the word out about this is obviously part of the answer, but so is, I think, outcome evaluation, impact evaluation. So I was inviting reflections on that if you're willing to opine. Thank you.
That very pertinent question. So bringing things to scale, but also informing impact evaluation and better outcomes. And you raised also the issue of corruption and larger power systems at play, let's say. So there's a lot to unpack there. I wonder, Pia, if you want to talk a little bit about at least one of those elements. Well, we have some time. Thank you, Chip.
Thank you very much, Chip, for that. And I mean, I think it was precisely to try to get to some of the elephants in the room. And when our report comes out, I really encourage everybody to read it early next year. But it will precisely address, you know, some of these entrenched structures without which the trafficking could not be as entrenched and systematic as it is. And it was precisely to be able to address those that we looked at a systems approach to do a very traditional human rights analysis, I would say, to say, well, where does this come from? Who's kind of enabling the violations? Who is benefiting? And where do the rights holders kind of sit within those power structures? So, I mean, I don't think that there's necessarily there's no depoliticization that's intended, nor I don't think needs to happen through including behavioral science into the toolbox. Far from it, I think it actually kind of it helps us to deepen the analysis. If the analysis needs to be deepened, and that's where having the right kind of environment to be able to say that we can speak truth to power in this kind of analysis is terribly important. Just very quickly on scale, because I think that in a sense that's a slightly more difficult one to do, particularly at this moment in time in the United Nations, because scale speaks as well to resources. Particularly the first intervention that I spoke about around narratives was quite resource intensive. It didn't need to be, and as I explained to the NGO colleague, we can do things that make it not that resource intensive. but certainly carrying out large-scale surveys, carrying out things like focus groups, etc., can be a drain on resources at a time when the system is struggling. So that, I think, is also a little bit what Natalia said, making it a normal part of our toolbox, saying this is important to do. It's not going to add a bureaucratic layer to it. It's not going to, make your life more difficult. It's going to help the analysis.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so also within UN human rights, just to your question, Chip, on scalability. So our answer to that, as Pia was saying, in a resource-constrained environment, is we need to make it part of the normal toolbox that human rights officers are using every single day. So their programming, their planning, their evaluations. And so that's really the work Natalia referenced and I did earlier, the collaboration on theories of change, the programming and planning cycle.
I can hear you. You're coming through
clearly. I think you're unmuted. So that's been part of bringing that to scale, is making sure that every human rights officer has an idea of what behavioral science is and how it applies to their day-to-day work, because it can't be one colleague or two trying to run the whole show. But I also wanted to highlight that the UN does have a behavioral science group. I think it's about 5,000 members that is a network of academia, external partners, and the UN, and they have a UN Behavioral Science Week every year where they highlight things across the UN system that are happening in terms of behavioral science and trying to create these replicable initiatives that can be shared across pillars or at least within specific country or regional contexts. And so I really recommend checking that out. That's one attempt as well to bring things more to scale, is by training each other and then practicing together. Natalia, or Danko or Beka, if you have any last words on this question.
No, I think you said it all, so we're good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to thank all of our colleagues who joined today. So Pia, Natalia, Danko, and Beka, really a pleasure to have you. And we actually have a few minutes left. I'm going to attempt, I work in technology, so I always like to troubleshoot. I'm going to attempt these two videos one last time, because I think we can possibly do it on Pia's computer here. So if you can open one there. So this will round out our session by having one video from our High Commissioner. If you go back to Teams, and we will show include some. That looks good. Try to share it one time. So we're going to try and show two videos from one from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, and then and now it doesn't want to share. These videos really do not want to be played today. We'll show it one last time. It's astounding. Okay. Well, I'm going to take that as a sign. For whatever reason, these two videos are not meant to be shared at this moment. But we are going to have this recording of this session on the RightsX website. Those will be sent out after the summit is over. We'll also put the two videos up. And I'll also have Cass Sunstein's talk from yesterday on behavioral barriers, what he also calls sludge, which was really quite an interesting talk. If you haven't read any of his books or anything, I highly recommend as well. He makes things very accessible. So thank you all so much for this session. Thanks to you who are online, and a big thanks to Beka and our colleagues at the Council of Europe.
Thank you so very much, Jessica.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.